For the past few Sundays, we've talked about a brief look at the church. We've discussed what the church is. We've discussed membership in the church. We've discussed the church from the point of view of Protestantism and Catholicism. We've talked about membership, worship, just about a little bit about various phases of the church. Today we want to talk about the church and our society. We're all members of society. We all have individual identities, of course, but we also have a culture that we call society. What about the church in society? The church is not a social force. It's not a political force. The church is not a business force. The church is a spiritual force. So in looking at the church in our society, I primarily want us to see something about what is the real mission of the church as it relates to the mission of Christ. Christ says, I came to seek and to save that which was lost. He did not come and die in order that we might have some kind of political force. He did not come and die so that people could be more successful in their business and have positive attitude. He came and died so that people could be saved. That was his primary goal. That was his primary objective in this whole thing of what he came to accomplish. The church is us. When I say church today, I want there to register something in you that says, oh, he's talking about me. Because that's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm talking about each of us individually and as a group or a collection or a congregation of God's people. After all, that's what the church is. When we first began talking about the church, we talked about what is the church, and we saw this word ecclesia. It means congregation, a group gathered together. And that's us, folks. That's what we are. That's who we are. So we don't never talk about the church they. It's the church we. The church us. What are they doing in the church? That says basically, I'm not a part of it, but they are. I want us instead to have an intimate feeling. Whatever we fail to do, that's what the church is failing to do. It makes it much more personal if we look at it that way, and it also makes it considerably more scriptural. So we're asking you today to think along the line of what is the mission of the church? That is, what is my mission? Not what is their mission. What is my mission? As we develop this, I hope we'll see that there's some category here that I can fit into. There's some work. There's some service. There's something that I can do as a part of God's church that will be beneficial to the church and to the community, to the other people in the church as well as the people who are around. There's a statement in Luke chapter 4 that's very, very interesting to me. 18 through 21. I won't read the whole thing, but here's what Jesus said. He is back in his hometown, by the way. He's back in the city of Nazareth. So the town of Nazareth is just a little place. He was back there and he visited the synagogue. And he sat down. They gave him a scroll. It was written in this scroll, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners, recovery of sight for the blind, release for the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And then he sat down. It was customary when an individual spoke, he would sit in a certain place. He sat down, and then he made this statement which has such a wide implication. He said, "This day is this prophecy fulfilled." That was basically an announcement to his own people, I am the one that Isaiah was speaking of ultimately in this prophecy. This day is fulfilled to you. What did he say was fulfilled? He says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the good news. The word good news there in the Greek is the word euangelion, and it means gospel. He has anointed me to preach the gospel. I want you to really hold that right before you so that in everything that we say today, we will see the proclamation of the gospel was the method that Jesus used. Jesus had a mission, and he had a method for carrying out that mission. Jesus' mission and method, then, is what we're talking about. His mission was to preach. His mission was to convert. His mission was to be kind and gentle and benevolent to other people. His mission was to inspire his disciples. We'll see all of that as we move along. Hey, you know what? That's the mission of the church. That's exactly what that is. That's the mission of the church. The church is supposed to preach the gospel, teach the gospel. The church is to spread the gospel. The church is to edify itself, build itself up. And the church is to be a benevolent institution to bring people to Christ. In the last chapter of Matthew, the Great Commission, very familiar to all of us, we emphasize Mark's statement, he that believeth and is baptized shall be saved, he that believeth not shall be condemned. We kind of go to Matthew every once in a while. Matthew gives a little different rendition of that. Matthew says, go therefore, or Jesus says in Matthew, go therefore and preach the gospel to every creature, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all things that I have commanded you, and lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the world. Actually he said, go make disciples. Mark said preach the gospel, but this is the same idea. It's the same thing. Jesus stated his mission. Hey folks, what is your mission? What is my mission? It's the same as the mission of Christ. To teach and to preach. Well, we teach in different ways. We teach maybe formally in a sermon. We teach in a class. But we teach in a variety of ways. It's like a story. I guess this never happened, but it's a story. The story of a lady who attended church in Scotland. And she spoke to the preacher the following week. She was in a fruit business. She measured out fruit and sold it. And she told the preacher the next week, she says, that was such a good sermon that you preached last week. And he thought he'd put her on the spot. So he says, what did I preach on last week? And she said, well, I don't remember what you preached on, but I remember what I did. I went home and took my peck measure, and I took the false bottom out of it. Well, that was the idea. You see, he taught. She responded, and in doing what she did, she taught. We teach in a variety of ways. We teach in our business. We teach who we are, what we stand for. We teach our value system. We teach as we raise our children. We teach as we relate to our husbands or wives. We teach as we relate to other people in the neighborhood. We are saying to the whole world, this is the kind of person that I am. Why am I like this? Because this is what God wants me to be. The method of Jesus was a teaching method. Wow, just think of the example that he left. An example of serving, an example of teaching in a wide variety of ways. And so that's my method. That's my mission. That's what I am to do. You need to say the same thing, because we are the church. That is yours. That is mine. That is what we are to do. We do it in the way that we do best. Make disciples of all nations, he said. What is a disciple? But we think a lot of times about the 12 disciples, don't we? Oh, well, that's okay. But a disciple is a follower. Discipleship is following Christ. So Jesus said, I want you to go and make disciples of all nations. Make them followers of me. How do you do that? Teaching, preaching, living, serving. This is the way we teach. That is our mission. That is our method. In Ephesians chapter 4, there's an interesting statement that this, I have to tell you, this tantalizes me. It really does. As I read this thing in Ephesians 4, beginning with verse 11, it just makes me stop and say to myself, hey, what is the church supposed to do in reference to this? Let me read a portion of it. It was He, that is Christ. It was He who gave some to be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers. Why? To prepare God's people for works of service. That's a function of the church. What are we doing here at Burbank to prepare people to serve? More about that in just a moment. So that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach, listen to this, the unity of the faith. Until we find unity. Not uniformity, by the way, but unity. Not uniformity. My wife and I had a great unity with each other. But we had a number of differences too. Many of you knew my wife. We always had differences. Viva la difference. You know, there were a whole lot of differences between us. But there was something that bound us together, that held us to one another, that nothing could ever break. No matter what our disagreements might have been, no matter what our differences might have been, there was a bond of unity there. As Paul says, keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. I had an uncle who was in the wholesale fishing tackle business one time, way back yonder, back in the 50s. Fishing tackle manufacturers had just come out with the glass rod. I remember hearing about a glass rod. That doesn't sound very good to me. I always saw glass breaking, you know, and if I got any kind of fish at all on there, he'd break that rod in two. Well, my uncle got a rod in which was damaged, and so he cut it in two, and he noticed that there were little fibers all through this thing. And so he took a match and he set fire to the resin. And the resin burned off, and there was all the little fibers that were there. And actually, it looked like an old shaving brush by that time, because the fibers, the glass fibers were just hanging there. And then suddenly, he realized, and when I saw it, I realized there's something holding the fibers together. The strength is in the fibers. But if the fibers are not held together, the fibers really become useless. Paul says, keep the unity of the Spirit in what? The bond of peace. The bond of peace. That which holds us together in the unity of the Spirit is that peace that passes all understanding. It is that peace within a congregation. It is that peace that allows for differences. It is that peace that holds us to one another. And so Paul says that we are to come to the unity of the faith in the knowledge of the Son of God, and here's another good one, and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. To become mature. Interesting word here again. The word is a word that means full grown, and it's a word that is also sometimes translated as perfect. And the idea is Not moral perfection, not ethical perfection, but maturity. Maturity. How does that maturity come? It comes in a variety of ways. It comes by serving. So we kind of go to the school of hard knocks and we make mistakes, but we learn from those mistakes. There are blunders and we learn from those blunders. But all along, we're studying and learning. And as we study and learn and serve, that's when we begin to grow in the maturity. So he says that we may all become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. Boy, I like that. That is so good because it describes not them, it describes us. You and me, all of us together as part of the church. We are a society of people who lived in a society much larger than we are. And as a society of people, we owe that society out there a great, great debt. The church has the charge of being a benevolent group of people. Jesus said in the 25th chapter of Matthew, he said, I want to paint you a picture of the judgment. When the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory and all of the people of the earth are gathered before him, he will divide them as a shepherd divides the sheep from the goats. And the sheep he'll place on his right hand and the goats on the left. And then he will say to those on the right hand, come, you blessed of my Father. I was hungry. You gave me to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger. You invited me in. I was in need of clothes. You clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. This is such an interesting answer that's given now. You know, some people kind of keep score, I think, sometimes. Oh, today I did this wonderful thing and that wonderful thing and another wonderful thing. And I just got a whole list of all the great things that I've done today. Both of them. And other people do wonderful things, but they never keep inventory of it. And then some people, like Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 13, some people, they find out every person has done something against them and they make a list of those people too. But these people to whom Jesus was speaking, he says, I was in need of all kinds of things. I was sick and in prison. I was hungry. I was thirsty. And you did these wonderful things for me. And they said, I don't remember that. I don't remember any of this stuff. The righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invited you in, or in need of clothes and clothed you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? Ah, then the king will reply, I tell you the truth. You know the rest of it, don't you? Whatever you did to one of the least of these, brothers, you did to me. I bet you something. I bet you if we knew that Jesus Christ was knocking on our door, we would open and invite him in. We would open and feed him. We would clothe him. We would help him in any way we could. And Jesus said, hey, as the church, my followers, my disciples, when you do it to one of the least of these, you're serving me. You're doing it to me. That's a tough lesson for me to learn. Some of you knew Carol Pitts. Carol Pitts was a minister down at the Normandy Church in South Los Angeles, near Pepperdine, the old Pepperdine campus. Carol was a wonderful man. I remember him speaking one time about this, and he said, you know what we do? We say, you were hungry, so I referred you to the soup kitchen. You were thirsty, and I referred you to the drinking fountain. You were a stranger, so we sent you to the homeless shelter. And he went on and talked about this, how it is that we get out of our personal responsibility by agencies. I recognize that there is a place for these things, but I also recognize something else. Folks, you and I need to serve. That's part of what the church does. That is part of what the church owes to its community. The church owes a debt to society. In the first chapter of Romans, verses 14 and 15, Paul was writing to the Romans. He'd never been there, by the way, but he wrote to the Roman church, and he said, I am obligated to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. So that is why, you get this, that is why I am so eager to preach the gospel to you. Isn't it great the way he mixed these two words? I'm obligated. I have the responsibility. I feel the responsibility. But he says at the same time, I'm so very ready to preach the gospel to you. I'm anxious to do that. Why? Because in that great heart of Paul, there was a gratitude that just overflowed. And he said, this is what God has done for me. He has taken me as a persecutor and made me his messenger. And he says, this has meant so much to me. It has changed my life. I have to share this message of salvation, this message of the gospel. I have to share it with someone else. That was his gift. And then he's the one who also said to the Corinthians, every person has his gift. Hey, your gift is not mine, mine is not yours, but you know what yours is? Use it to the glory of God. That's the mission of the church. That is what the church owes to society. That is what we need to be in our society. We need to be those evangelists. Last Friday night, or a couple of Friday nights ago, we had a congregational meeting. And by the way, I'd like to say there's another congregational meeting coming up this coming Friday night. Be sure to be there. It'll be a very, very important meeting. You remember we had, back in August, we got together and brainstormed things that the church could do. Well, these were divided up into little categories, and these categories, there are 9 of them. These categories, you'll find some way that you can serve in each of these. Now, there's some of these sheets out in the foyer there. For example, all of the 50 items that were given to us from the congregation, all of these are listed here, and they just kind of fall into these little categories. Spiritual development, general planning, education, outreach, worship, advertising and publicity, benevolence, building and grounds, and congregational care. And there's a number of things that are listed in these things. These are the things that the church has said the church wants to do. That is, these are the things that you and I have said you and I want to do. Nobody shoveled these things out and put them in a pile here. No. Instead, the congregation said, this is what we would like to see done. Now, the question is this. Where do you fit? Where do you fit? These are works of service. Where do you fit? Maybe you fit in spiritual development. Well, on Friday night, we're going to get together, and people have already volunteered, some have already volunteered to do some of these things. And so that's part of what this meeting, I understand, is going to be about, is how do we allocate some of that? And then there's a little small paper like this also in the back that says your name and your phone number, and it asks you a question. Out of these categories, in which of these areas would you find the most enjoyment? You know, people do things the best that they enjoy doing. And so, in what do you find your greatest enjoyment? In which of these areas is your interest most greatly stimulated? And which of these areas am I best qualified to work in? And then one that I think comes down to us frequently. In which of these areas would I like to learn to work? Some people say, you know, I just don't know how to do these things. I wish I could, but I just don't know how to do these things. Maybe you would like to learn. And so this needs to be a part of the whole thing. By doing these things, we can better serve the society, the community in which we live. And after all, the church has a responsibility and obligation to serve its community. How can we best, from a financial point of view, from a talent and ability point of view, from the opportunities that present us, how can we best reach to the community in order to discharge our responsibility, but in order to share this wonderful message of salvation from Jesus Christ? Oh, you say, I can't teach, I can't preach, I can't sit down and do personal work with people. I'm bad about knocking on doors. I don't know of anything I can do. Hey, those are not the only things to do. There are a number of other things too. The important thing is that we volunteer for something. If we volunteer for something, we'll find finally the niche that we work best in. So what is this mission of the church? It's threefold. The church is to preach the gospel, just as Jesus preached the gospel. The church, it builds itself up. It encourages each other. That word occurs a number of times in the New Testament. Self-edification. The church, a part of the function of each of us is to encourage the other person. How long has it been since you just stopped and really encouraged somebody in what they do? Say to someone, I really appreciate what you do. Some of you remember George Beale. George Beale should have been named Barnabas. I don't know who named him George. They should have named him Barnabas. Because he was, as the Bible says, Barnabas means he was the son of encouragement. He knew how to go to people, not in an ostentatious way, but he knew how to go to people and just say a word of encouragement. It would build them up, and they walk out that door feeling so much better about George and the congregation and themselves. That's part of what the church does. And then the church works in benevolence, helping the poor, helping the needy, helping those people who can't help themselves, always with the goal in mind, as Jesus had, to bring them to Christ. That is our ultimate mission. The mission of Jesus is the mission of the church. The church has a great obligation and responsibility to its community. Let's find ways to do this. If you're not a Christian today, we're going to sing an invitation song that suggests the Master's call. To come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest, Jesus says. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and you will find rest into your souls. For my burden is light and my yoke is easy. If you want to become a Christian today, come and be baptized into Christ. Let's stand together and sing.